Gas was crawling toward the flames, a silver SUV lay on its roof like a crushed soda can, and I was already running before my brain could vote otherwise. Phones were out, people were yelling, sirens are coming, but I knew if we waited for permission, there'd be nothing left to save. I elbowed glass, tasted smoke, cut a stubborn seatbelt with a tired box cutter, and pulled a stranger through the window as the heat pressed in like a fist. We stumbled 20 feet, and the car blew not movie pretty, just a mean boom and a wave of fire that slapped us to the asphalt. And when I opened my eyes, she was crying against my chest, and I heard my own voice say, "You're safe now," even though my back felt like it had argued with the road and lost. My name is Jordan Miles. I stack and lift to keep the lights on, and I take night classes slow enough to make hope feel like a layaway plan, and the woman I dragged from that mess was Lila Harrington, though I didn't know it yet, queen of glass towers and charity galas and last names that open doors. I don't even know the addresses of, you know what I mean. EMTs took her cameras. Forgot me, I limped to my car and left with the kind of quiet you get when adrenaline clocks out. Next day, a bank called about a generous wire that bounced like a bad check with good intentions. The teller looked at me like I was running a scam, and I laughed. Because yeah, that happened. That's exactly how the world writes, a thank you, when it thinks your life can be settled like a bill. 3 days later, Lila knocked on my 4th floor door. No makeup I could see sling on her arm, rich, but trying not to look like it, and asked, "May I come in?" with a voice that sounded like she wasn't just asking about the room. My apartment is a fan that rattles a hot plate, a mattress, a second-hand table buried under textbooks, and a wall of photos of my mother, a custodian with kind eyes, who used to say, "We got our humanity, baby, nobody can repossess that." Lila noticed the books first, touched the broken spines, asked, "You read all these?" And I told her, "I eat the free samples of knowledge," and she smiled like she hadn't smiled in a while. We walked to Tia Carmen's on the corner because if this was going to be weird, it should at least come with eggs done right. The regulars stared, Carmen slid me coffee and gave Lila that, "Are you for real?" look, and Lila said, "Yes, ma'am," and Carmen nodded. Like, okay, we'll see. I told Lila about sweating through shifts in a box we pretend is a warehouse. The quotas that get tighter while the fans get older. The night classes I chip at with a spoon, the idea I draw every night like a prayer. A logistics company that treats people like humans, not numbers. You scold on a clipboard. Profit-sharing, predictable schedules, safety. That's not a poster, but a plan. And she listened, like attention was something she could actually give instead of hoard. Asked real questions, pushed holes in my idea until what stood up could walk. You can fall in love with the way someone pays attention, not romantic movie violins, just the feeling of being seen without a sales pitch. And when I walked her back to her car, I said, "This is probably a bad idea," and she said, "Probably," then touched my shoulder and smiled like a promise. She kept showing up, said Pilates to her world, said "see you soon" to mine. Brought a casserole she learned on YouTube that turned into soup, and we ate it anyway, laughed until knots. I didn't know. I had loosened, kissed over flan one night with caramel on her lip, and the whole cafe pretended not to notice while clapping with their eyes ridiculous. Yes, alive also, yes. Word traveled like it always does. In my neighborhood, folks were protective, then bored when we didn't implode on schedule. In hers, the whispers rolled around on golf carts with names like tradition and pedigree. And the fuse that started on the freeway found its way to a ballroom. Because of course it did. Lila's family foundation had a gala chandeliers like icicles, smiles that know the price of everything, and the ache of nothing. I wasn't planning to go until she left her grandmother's bracelet at my place, probably on purpose. Probably because she knew I'd walk into any room for her, so I borrowed a tux. Squared my shoulders and crossed a carpet that looked allergic to steel-toed boots. I found her eyes first, always find her eyes. First handed her the bracelet and watched her hands tremble as she slid it on. And when she said, "Dance with me," I said, "Everyone's watching." And she said, "Let them watch." And we moved slow in a room that wanted to speed us out of it. Sterling tried to cut in with the confidence of a man who's never heard no from someone he can't fire. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. And I said, a man who forgot how to ask a question, like a question, his face tightened. "Listen, boy," started to fall out of his mouth, and I told him, "Finish that sentence, please give me the excuse," and Lila stepped between us and said, "Walk away," and he did, because the room was watching, and rooms matter to men like him more than fights they might lose. Then her father waved me to the balcony, Gregory Harrington with his calm, like a paid forecast, city spread under us, like a model he owned two of, and he said, "I could end you with a phone call," and I said, "Probably, but you'd still wake up with a daughter who hates you for it." And we stood there in the kind of silence where men measure each other without speaking, you know what I mean. He asked, "Why are you here?" And the truth lined up, and I picked the only one that could walk alone. "She makes me braver," I said. "I'm not asking for your money or your mercy. I'm asking for your respect. If you can't give it, I'll manage." He told me his father was a mechanic in Dayton, and he'd spent 40 years making sure nobody could see that. Then he said he wasn't blessing us, only deciding whether to destroy us. And I told him if he did, his empire wouldn't hug him when he's old. And he laughed once like he'd forgotten he knew how. "Do you fix cars?" he asked. "Enough to keep mine alive," I said. "There's a fastback that won't run right." He said, "It's the carburetor." I said, "Tomorrow," he said. And I didn't say yes and didn't say no. I showed up with grease under my nails before we started, buried my forearms in a V8. Like a confession, he told stories about real estate, as if it were war. And he was a general who never lost. The engine coughed, then roared, and he smiled at me the way men smile when a machine finally listens. And later he said, "I could use someone who understands logistics." And I said, "I won't be your charity," and he said, "Good, I'll make you work double so nobody can call it that." My cousin Dre side-eyed Lila like she was a lit match near dry grass. Said she's slumming, she'll leave you paying the tab, but she showed up with a sheet cake that didn't sink on the third try, sat on a plastic chair, washed dishes in a kitchen with a stubborn faucet, called my Aunt Ma'am like it was natural. And my neighborhood, which knows performance when it sees, it decided she was real enough to keep coming around. "Miss Alma." My grandmother looked Lila up and down like truth had a shape and said, "Love is work, girl." And Lila said, "Yes, ma'am," like a promise. And that was the only blessing I needed. The twist you're waiting for happened at the next gala, when Gregory tapped a glass and announced the Miles Initiative training and seed money for entrepreneurs from the parts of the city people drive around on purpose, a scholarship to accelerate my degree, a role helping design a program that wasn't a photo op, but a pivot. The applause started polite and grew into something that felt like permission, not from him, from the room, which is a sad truth and a useful one. Later, I found Lila back on that balcony city, humming the same place her father had threatened to erase me, and my knees hit the ground before I finished the thought, because some vows belong closer to the earth. The ring was simple and paid for. The ask was not, "Will you marry me?" And she said yes, with no space for doubt to sneak in. "Elise," cried Gregory, pretended his eye itched, then admitted he was crying too, and said if we were going to do this, we'd do it right. And I laughed, because reformed snob or not, the man loves a show. The wedding was a mashup that made the news for all the reasons that used to keep us apart, my side and hers, pressed onto the same dance floor. Tia Carmen serving tamales between governors and forklift drivers, Miss Alma teaching Gregory to two-step while negotiating peace terms that included Marvin Gaye and decent coleslaw Dre, ended up trading numbers with Sterling because life is messy and we love it that way. After that, we didn't become saints. We became busy. I worked the internship like my future depended on it, because it did. Lila turned the initiative into a ladder. You can actually climb our pilot warehouse opened with fans that work, and schedules you can plan a life around the first quarter. Numbers said this might fly the second, said it might scale. And the best part wasn't the spreadsheet. It was the faces on payday when shares became not a word, but a check. I still think about the freeway, when the light goes low and the heat sits on the city like a hand about the boom, and the way she looked at me like I was a rope thrown across water. And I'm honest enough to say I thought I saved her, and maybe I did. But we pulled each other out of smaller lives we didn't choose. And I know some people think we crossed lines. They'd rather keep painted thick rooms still nod at me now, and I can't tell if the nod means welcome or careful workers in our own building tell me we're not there yet. And I say, keep telling me because I'd rather be corrected than congratulated, you know what I mean. If you're still here, tell me where you land. Were we right to push back on the walls built out of class and color, or do you think those lines protect something you've seen up close? Have you watched a room decide who belongs and who doesn't? And did you say anything, or did you stay quiet because quiet felt safer? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what justice looks like where you live if you think love should make us braver, type braver. If you think I'm naive, say, why just don't go silent? Because the only thing worse than a wall is a silence that agrees with it.